I was a junior in high school when this happened. It was the second to last week of the school year, that dead zone where finals were done, grades were mostly set, and everyone was just waiting for it to be over. Teachers had mentally checked out. Students had mentally checked out. The whole building felt like it was running on autopilot. That's probably why no one thought much of it when a substitute showed up for our English class. His name, according to the whiteboard, was Mr. Harlan. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, I'd guess. Tall, thin build, dark hair going gray at the temples. He dressed neatly, which I remember thinking was unusual for a sub. Most of them showed up looking like they'd rolled out of bed and grabbed whatever was on the floor. This guy wore a collared shirt, tucked in, like he'd made an effort. He introduced himself briefly, said he was covering for Mrs. Aldridge, who was out sick, and then he handed out a reading worksheet and told us to work quietly. Standard substitute behavior. He sat down at the front desk and opened a folder. For the first 10 minutes, everything was completely normal. People were whispering, some were on their phones under the desk, a few were actually doing the worksheet. I was somewhere in between, doodling in the margin of my notebook. At some point I looked up, the way you do when you feel like someone's watching you, but you don't know why. Mr. Harlan was looking at me. Not in the way a teacher glances around the room. He was looking at me directly, steadily, with no expression at all. And when I made eye contact, he didn't look away. He just held it for a second too long before slowly shifting his gaze somewhere else in the room. I told myself it was nothing. Teachers watch their classes. That's normal. I looked back down at my notebook. But over the next 20 minutes, I kept glancing up. And every time I did, I caught him in the middle of looking at someone. Not moving around naturally the way a teacher does, but locked onto one face, studying it, then slowly moving to the next. Like he was going around the room, one person at a time, taking inventory. I leaned over to my friend Dana and whispered about it. She looked up, watched him for a second, then shrugged and said he was probably just making sure no one was on their phones. I wanted to agree with her. I mostly managed to. The class ended. Everyone packed up and left. I didn't think about it much for the rest of the day, but that evening, I realized I couldn't remember his face clearly. I could picture the general shape of him, tall, neat, dark hair, but his actual features were somehow blurry in my memory, like my brain hadn't been able to hold on to them properly. I've thought about that since. I don't know what to make of it. The next day was uneventful. Different teacher, normal class. I walked to the parking lot after school, and that should have been the end of it. Except he was there. Mr. Harlan was standing at the far edge of the student parking lot, near the tree line that borders the back of the school property. He wasn't walking toward a car. He wasn't on his phone. He was just standing there, slightly back from where the pavement ended and the grass began, half in the shadow of the trees. And when I saw him, he was already looking at me. I kept walking to my car. I told myself, maybe he parked back there, maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe I was making something out of nothing because of what happened yesterday. I unlocked my car, got in, and as I was backing out, I looked over one more time. He hadn't moved. He was still standing there, watching my car. I drove home and spent that night half convincing myself I'd imagined the whole thing. 2 days later, my classmate Brianna mentioned something at lunch that made my stomach drop. She said she'd gotten a follow request on Instagram from a strange account. No profile picture. No posts, just a username that was a long string of numbers. She'd ignored it. But when she checked the account's following list out of curiosity, she recognized almost every name. They were all girls from our English class. Not just a few of them, almost all of them. The account had gone through, one by one, and followed nearly every girl who had been in that room. We reported it together that afternoon. By the next morning, the account was gone, either deleted or made private. We tried to look into it further, but there was nothing to trace. I went to the front office and asked about Mr. Harlan. The woman at the desk looked up his name, frowned slightly, and told me he was a one-time hire through a third-party staffing agency and that the school had no further information beyond that. She said it in the tone of someone reading off a card, polite but blank. I asked if he'd ever substituted there before or if he was scheduled to come back. She said she couldn't tell me that. I pushed a little and asked if I could know the name of the staffing agency so I could follow up. She said that wasn't something she could share with students. That was the last conversation I had about it officially. I'm in my mid-20s now. I still think about him sometimes, that slow scan across the room, face after face after face. The way he was already standing in the parking lot the next day, already watching when I came out. The way the account found every single one of us. I've never been able to confirm who he was or what he actually wanted. I'm not sure I want to.
This happened the last day of 8th grade. I was 13 years old. My school had a tradition where the entire 8th grade class went on a year-end field trip to Ashford State Park, a big wooded area about 40 minutes from school. It was supposed to be a celebration, a last hurrah before high school. You'd hike around, eat lunch on the grass by the lake, take a bunch of photos, and then pile back onto the buses with that specific feeling of something ending. It was a big group, 5 buses, close to 200 kids, maybe a dozen teachers and parent chaperones spread across the whole thing. There was a loose itinerary: meet at the trailhead at 10, hike the main loop, lunch at noon by the pavilion, free time by the lake until 2, back on the buses by 2:30. Nothing structured. Teachers were relaxed. It was the last day. Nobody was really keeping count. I got separated from my group of friends about an hour into the hike. It wasn't dramatic. I stopped to look at something on the trail, turned around, and they were gone around a bend. I jogged to catch up and turned the wrong corner. The main trail split near a rocky outcrop, and I went right without thinking. Their voices faded and then disappeared. I wasn't worried. At first, the park wasn't enormous. I figured the trails looped back on themselves and I'd end up at the pavilion eventually. I kept walking, looking for trail markers. About 15 minutes in, I realized the trail I was on wasn't marked. There were no colored blazes on the trees, no signage, no arrows. The path was narrow but worn. People had walked it before, definitely. But it wasn't an official route. It curved down into a low area between 2 ridges, getting quieter as I went. I stopped and listened. I couldn't hear anything. No voices, no distant sounds from the group. Nothing. Just wind through leaves. That's when the quiet started to feel wrong. I turned around to head back the way I came. I'd taken maybe a dozen steps when I heard footsteps on the trail behind me. I turned around expecting a classmate who'd gotten lost the same way I had. Maybe one of the kids I recognized from the bus. It was a man I had never seen before. He looked to be in his late 30s or 40s. He was wearing jeans and a dark jacket, not hiking gear, not park staff clothing, nothing that made sense for someone on a trail in a state park on a Tuesday morning. He wasn't carrying a backpack, no water bottle, no bag of any kind, just walking, hands at his sides at a steady, normal pace. He was looking directly at me. I stood there for a second, frozen in that way where your brain takes too long to catch up to what your body already knows. He kept walking toward me, closing the distance, not saying anything, not changing his expression. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran, pushing through branches, following the path back uphill toward where I thought the main trail was. My lungs were burning, and I could hear my own footsteps loud on the packed dirt, and I just kept going. I burst out onto the main trail and nearly ran straight into 2 of my teachers, Mr. Patterson and Ms. Delvaux, who were walking together back toward the buses. They grabbed me, asked what happened, and I tried to explain between breaths. I pointed back down the unmarked path. They looked. There was nobody there. They walked a little way down the trail, called out, saw nothing. Mr. Patterson seemed more confused than concerned. He said I probably just got startled by a hiker. Miss Delvaux gave me water and kept her hand on my shoulder while we walked back to the group. Nobody filed a report. The consensus was that I'd gotten spooked being alone. I was 13, I was a kid, and I hadn't actually been harmed. By the time we got on the buses, most of the teachers seemed to have forgotten about it. But here's what I never said out loud back then, because I knew it would sound strange. That trail, the unmarked one, I went back to the park 2 years later with my dad and I tried to find it. We walked the whole area around that rocky outcrop. There was no secondary trail there anymore. No worn path going down between the ridges, no gap in the undergrowth, nothing. Either it had completely grown over in 2 years, which is possible, but would take time, or I still don't understand where I was. The second thing I never said was this. When the man came around the bend in the trail, he didn't look like he was hiking. He didn't look like he was lost. He looked like he was exactly where he expected to be. And the path that I just wandered down by accident, he came from further along it. Meaning he'd already been down there, in that low area between the ridges before I arrived, waiting, or doing something else entirely. I've never found an explanation that fully satisfies me.
I probably never will.
I graduated high school on the second Friday of June. I was 18 years old, and it felt like the world was supposed to start that night. The ceremony was at the football field. Fold-out chairs on the grass, parents in the bleachers, that particular combination of heat and artificial light that makes everything feel slightly unreal. I walked across the stage, shook hands, got my diploma folder, which was empty. They mailed the actual diploma later, and went back to my seat. Afterward, my parents had a small party at our house. Nothing elaborate, just close family, a few neighbors, some of my friends cycling in and out over the course of the evening. My aunt brought a cake. My uncle gave me $20 in an envelope, which felt like exactly as much as it sounds. People took photos and made speeches and told me the next 4 years would be the best of my life. By around 11, most people had cleared out. My parents went to bed. The only person still there was my best friend, Marcus, who'd been at my side since middle school and had his own graduation earlier that week. We were sitting in the backyard on the old patio chairs, talking about nothing in particular. College plans, the summer, people we'd known since freshman year, the way you talk when you're both. Aware something is ending and neither of you wants to say it directly. The backyard was dark except for the patio light mounted above the back door. The reach of that light only goes so far. It covers the patio and about 15 feet of lawn, and then beyond that it's just shadow. We'd been sitting out there for maybe 45 minutes, comfortable enough that neither of us had really been looking at the darker edges of the yard. Our house was older, built in the 70s. The detached garage sat off to the right side of the property, connected to the driveway that ran alongside the house. At the back corner of the yard where the garage met the property line, there was a gap in the fence. An old wooden panel had rotted through and fallen 2 winters earlier. My dad had meant to replace it every season since, and every season something else came up. So there was just this gap, maybe 4 feet wide, open to the narrow service alley that ran behind the row of houses. I knew the gap was there. I'd grown up with it. I'd never thought of it as anything other than a maintenance problem. Marcus saw it first. He stopped mid-sentence and went quiet. I noticed the silence and looked over at him. He was staring at the far end of the yard toward the garage. His expression wasn't quite fear, it was that careful, controlled look people get when they're not sure yet if they're seeing what they think they're seeing. He said quietly, without turning to me, "Hey, is someone standing by your garage?" I looked. There was a figure in the gap in the fence, standing completely still, partially obscured by the garage's shadow facing toward us. I couldn't make out features. I couldn't even tell you with certainty if it was a man or a woman, just a figure standing there in the dark, not moving at all, in the gap that was supposed to just be a gap. I watched it for what felt like a long time but was probably 10 seconds. It didn't shift its weight. It didn't turn its head. It just stood there. I called out, "Hello?" No response. I called again, louder this time. "Hey, can I help you?" Nothing. Marcus picked up his phone and turned on the flashlight. He aimed it at the fence line. The gap was empty. We both sat there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then Marcus got up and I followed him across the yard to the fence. We looked through the gap into the alley on the other side. Empty. No sound of footsteps, no movement in either direction. Just the alley, the backs of fences, the occasional distant sound from the street. My dad came out with a flashlight when I went inside to get him. He walked the whole perimeter, checked behind the garage, checked the side driveway, walked the alley for a full block in both directions. Nothing. He came back looking more tired than alarmed, told us it was probably a neighbor cutting through, and went back to bed. Marcus and I went back inside and didn't really talk about it. We watched something on TV, and eventually he went home. It was the next afternoon that Marcus texted me. He said he'd been going through his photos from the night before, and he'd found something. He said he almost didn't send it, but he thought I should know. He'd taken a photo at the moment he turned on his flashlight. Just a reflex, he said. He did it without really thinking. The way you do sometimes when something feels off and your body acts before your brain does. He'd taken the photo in the split second between seeing the figure and turning on the flashlight. Before the flashlight flooded the frame, he sent it to me. The photo was dark. Grainy in that way phone photos get when there's low light and slight motion blur. But you could see the patio, the lawn, the back of the yard, and in the gap in the fence, in the shadow by the garage, there was a figure. The resolution wasn't good, but you could see clearly enough that it was a person, standing upright, facing toward the camera, toward us, toward where we'd been sitting, arms at their sides. I stared at that photo for a long time. My dad never found any evidence of anyone having been in the yard or the alley. No footprints in the mud near the fence, and there had been rain 2 days earlier, so the ground was soft. Nothing disturbed, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I've thought of a lot of explanations over the years. Someone cutting through who just froze when we called out, then slipped away in the dark. A neighbor we didn't recognize. Shadows and suggestion and 2 tired people at the end of a long, emotional night. Some of those explanations almost work. But I keep coming back to one detail that I can't explain away. We were sitting on that patio for almost an hour before Marcus noticed. The patio light was on the entire time. The yard behind us was lit. If someone had walked into that gap while we were sitting there, we would have seen them, which means they were already there, standing in the dark before we even came outside, watching us. For how long? I don't know. Marcus still has the photo on his phone. We don't look at it anymore. Some things you're better off leaving in the dark where you found them.